This is me, freediving 15 feet below the surface in Puerto Rico, installing an artificial fish habitat, or as I like to call it, a fish hotel for juvenile Nassau grouper. What prompted me to become a concierge at a Nassau grouper fish hotel? Well, being a fish lover and a marine science enthusiast, I volunteered at a marine conservation organization called Isla to help them protect and document Nassau grouper populations in the Caribbean. Once a key species in local Caribbean fishing communities, the Nassau grouper's population crashed in the mid-1970s and since then has shown limited signs of recovery in the U.S. Caribbean.
My name is Dr. Evan Tui, and I'm co-founder of Isla Research Expeditions. One of the reasons why it did undergo such a widespread population decline has a lot to do with its biology as a species.
The Nassau grouper have a somewhat unique reproductive strategy. They congregate for about a week, once a year according to the lunar cycle in massive groups at the same locations each year. These spawning aggregations once numbered at up to 100,000 individuals and can still reach numbers of tens of thousands of fish.
That's just a biological phenomenon, but it also really easy to locate and for fishermen to fish.
Thankfully, many marine organizations like Isla Mar have heard the plight of the Nassau grouper and are trying to help its population rebound.
We have been using and deploying settlement traps at known areas with high abundances of these juvenile Nassau grouper. And these settlement traps, essentially, it's just rude and crude, but they're just pieces of PVC that are stacked together and attached to one another with cable ties. And it creates artificial substrate that would attract the fish.
The settlement traps emulate structures like coral, or in this example, the old piling in which this Nassau grouper is hiding.
We deploy these at the sites with known abundances of these juveniles, and that allows us to track when they settle, how long they're staying in those habitats, and it also gives us an opportunity to catch some of these juveniles and take a fin clip for genetic analysis later on.
If that Nassau grouper's genotype matches an aggregation genotype, then the offspring produced at that spawning aggregation are settling and causing juvenile recruitment events. Successful recruitment events are important indicators of population recovery. Data proving that a certain site is active can be given to management, perhaps along with a proposition that they might impose heavier protection around that site. In the coral reefs of the Caribbean, the Nassau grouper is a species that is paramount to maintain proper reef health. In coral reef ecosystems, like in all ecosystems, a careful balance exists in the predator-prey dynamic. Being a larger predatory fish, adult Nassau groupers share the important duty of keeping down the populations of smaller predatory fish, like these juvenile schoolmasters. If there is an unproportionately large amount of small predatory fish, then they will eat too many herbivorous fish, causing algae populations to grow unhealthily large. Too much algae can cause entire sections of reef to die from a lack of sunlight and oxygen. Since these reefs are also facing ocean acidification and are bleaching in record numbers, a competitor is the last thing they need. Using the settlement traps to further protect spawning aggregation sites will limit human predation and give Nassau grouper a better shot at population recovery. To begin the settlement trap deployment process, Evan and I first scouted out areas at which Nassau juveniles have been spotted, searching for the ideal nursery habitat. Usually consisting of a mix between seagrass and patch reef, nursery habitat was not hard to come by. Once we had located a prime position for our fish hotel, we would secure it to the bottom using a foot-long piece of rebar. Over the course of 3 days in January of 2024, Evan and I deployed 20 settlement traps in 6 locations along the west coast of Puerto Rico with the hopes that juvenile Nassau grouper from the current spawning season would settle there in a few months. Upon returning to Puerto Rico 6 months later, Evan and I unfortunately didn't notice any evidence of juvenile Nassau grouper recruitment in our deployment areas, despite the fact that the fish had been spotted there previously. Additionally, most of the traps that we had deployed had been dismantled by large swell events, which are common during the early spring. However, the traps that remained had become well integrated into the environment and many other juvenile fishes were inhabiting them. This observation supported the concept behind the settlement traps and suggested that the lack of juvenile Nassau in and around our traps was because the larvae simply hadn't settled there. Even though it might appear that our project wasn't successful, that's definitely not the case, as we were able to lay the groundwork for the next round of settlement traps that Isla deploys. Evan and I decided that next time we would be certain to more thoroughly scout out the region around the traps and ensure that it is sheltered from those big swell events. We could also create sturdier traps out of thicker pieces of PVC using stronger zip ties and longer rebar. Hopefully, next time we would also have better luck with Nassau grouper recruitment in the areas in which we deployed those traps. My work at Isla taught me a ton about Nassau grouper and their habitat, sharpened my understanding of the scientific method, and demonstrated how marine science organizations can support communities of fish and the people who rely on them.